They are midway down the avenue, mid-stride, the marquee of the Dreamland cinema in the background. Annie is in the middle, smiling fully into the lens of the street photographer's camera. Her feet barely touch the ground. Robert on the right is gazing at her. William on the left looks like something out of vaudeville. He is beaming.
At the 11th hour on November 11th, 2003, my life changed. I was caught completely off guard in the spaghetti aisle of a grocery store, when normally I would be with my family, my little family, in a very large crowd on the legislature grounds, attending the Remembrance Day service. We'd be listening to the poetry, the music of the war years. We would hear the last post. We would hear the firing of the guns echoing. We would smell cordite, and we'd see smoke wafting through the river valley. And I was in the spaghetti aisle. There was an announcement that there would be 2 minutes of silence. And there I was, in the store, my tears rolling down my cheeks. Annie and William tore out of the Hotel McDonald ballroom. They forced their way down the avenue, gasping for breath, howling with laughter. Folks scattered as William took Annie by the waist and swung her around in dizzying circles. Thousands of people had gathered on the sidewalks, on the rooftops, in the trees, everyone cheering in eager anticipation of the glimpse of their sovereigns. "We want the king! We want the queen!" Through the throng, William and Annie waltzed and whirled their way to their private place behind the Dreamland Theatre. In a while, Robert came running with open arms and a bottle of champagne in one hand. He fell into the embrace of his dearest friends, popping the cork as the first of the fireworks exploded over the Hotel McDonald. And innocent Italians cowered in their cellars, and indiscriminate carnage left both civilians and soldiers dead or praying for their lives. But not William, or Ed, or Goofy. Still they kept moving, onward. They paused in the doorway of an abandoned barber shop to catch their breath. The mosaic sign, Barbiere di Dante, hung over the portico, and a broken shutter whined softly on its rusty hinge. Less than 30 yards away, across the vacant square, the dome of the half-demolished cathedral hovered over the ruins. As clouds scuttled across the sky, the sun shone sporadic streams of light along the severed edges of fresco. A stone's throw away, a lone shadow appeared, spilling unknowingly into their view. "I'll go," whispered Ed, pressing his hand against Will's chest. "Cover me." William could feel the rhythmic crump and rumble of artillery bombardment in distant streets, ebbing and flowing through his veins as he watched. Without warning, his blood ran cold. He opened his mouth. "Stop!" Phillips was trapped in the fiery spew of a flamethrower. Liquid hell pinned him to the ground in a writhing blaze, and finally, stillness. William screamed, Ed and charged upwards into the cathedral dome, onward, swallowed by blackness and silence. Even though I tried to ignore the impulse, these characters and their story overtook my daytime and nighttime thinking, my dreaming. But the problem was I knew nothing about the war, literally nothing. And thank goodness we have a regiment museum right here in Edmonton, and that became my home and also a source of great resource and research, but deep, lasting friendships.
Laurel, you've been talking to me about how one of your main core essential friendships that you developed during this time that you were researching in the archives was with the veteran Bill Telesky. Can you tell me more about him and show some of the items that you found that he wore and used during the war that eventually ended up being part of the research for your novel?
Absolutely. He was the first veteran. There were a couple that I had formed a little bit of friendship with, but Bill, he came to my home. There was no question that was too stupid for him. And honestly, I knew nothing. I didn't know a battalion from a pile of bricks. And he just was an open book to me. And I have to say, like, I've never actually touched, this is his uniform. In all these years, I could touch the real person and never got to touch his uniform. And here at the museum today, I'm given the opportunity to actually touch what he wore, and it brings so much more meaning. You know, I will say I knew nothing about the war, but I knew a little bit about loss. I knew a fair bit about love, and that was enough to make me believe that I could find out what I needed to know to tell these characters' story. And Bill was so instrumental. He became really a part of almost every chapter in the book. He liked to write poetry like my character in the book likes to write poetry. And he tells me one day about the time he decided that in order to have his poetry in the regimental magazine, that it had to be typewritten. So what does he do? But in an empty police station, he spies a typewriter on a desk, and he runs in and steals the thing so that he can submit his poetry. And after the war, so Italian alphabet is not like ours. He shipped this back to Canada when they were going into heavy, heavy battle, and they couldn't take all of their belongings with them. He shipped this back to Canada in little parcels because there was a weight limit. So this was in, I don't know, 20 different parcels, shipped them back to Canada. And when he came back, he took it to the Underwood Company and they reassembled it all for him. And when they found out that he was a veteran and how he acquired it, they wouldn't charge him for the work they did. So that's a little side story. The typewriter ended up being quite a large part of the book, and I said to him, Bill, I want that story. I want to have my William steal a typewriter. I want my William to be writing poetry, and I'm asking permission. And he said, okay, I will let you have that story, but you have to mention me in the book. I want to be one of your characters. I'll be friends with the gay guy. I don't want to be a gay guy, but I'll be his friend. And if you would raise my rank, I would appreciate it. So Private Bill Telesky had his rank raised for the book. This is also his rifle, his Lee Enfield rifle. Now, I don't know if you can tell from this picture of Bill, he is kind of short. When the Loyal Edmonton Regiment made their amphibious landing at Pechino in Sicily, they got off in the water. And he is walking down the ramp and realizes, I'll just lift this. The water is getting higher and higher and higher. And poor Bill is running into shore with his rifle over his head because the water's up to his neck. And he wouldn't want to have his rifle in the water, in that salt water. So that's weird. Again, for me, just as the writer of a novel, to hold the item that my great inspiration, my veteran of choice, used in the actual war. And all of these things are precious, just as the relationship with the veterans are precious. To remember them authentically is precious. And I feel so privileged to have had these people to help inform the truth of the novel. This is one of my most favorite photos from a battlefield tour I took. And these two old gentlemen sitting on this wall. And I wrote to them later and said, I didn't want to disturb you on the day, but do you remember what you were thinking when everybody else was walking around and you were sitting on the wall? And this fellow wrote back and said, we were just thinking, what a waste. This was the first Edmonton Regiment soldier to be lost in the campaign. This is in Sicily. This is the beach where they landed. This is where Bill had to walk off with his rifle over his head. And this fellow is a veteran. He was on the bus. He was first off, tearing his clothes off as he went, running, and I hope I'm running when I'm 80, into the water as far as he could go. And then he turned around and came back into shore with his arms over his head. And I said, Jim, what are you doing? And he said, I just wanted to run into that shore before I died without gunfire around me.
Had a very extensive process of researching and writing, from the Spaghetti Isle Epiphany in 2003 to beginning archival research in 2004, doing the battlefield tour in Italy in 2008, and many more years after that. So can you tell us a little bit about this long journey?
It's hard to believe, but from the brain to the bookshelf actually took from that epiphany in 2003 to 2015 in this very store. I stood and had my original launch. Was it a linear journey? Absolutely not. Part of the problem was I kept trying to tell myself, you can't do this. Who do you think you are? All those little monkeys on my shoulder that kept telling me I didn't know what I was doing and therefore shouldn't do it. And I had kids and family, and I had aging parents. So the journey was long, but the depth of research was so deep, and the intensity of the relationships built along the way, which were necessary to be able to breathe life into the characters. It was worth every minute of the time. Challenging, yes, but filled my heart, and it takes as long as it takes. It took as long as it took, and here we are now, almost, I don't know, 10 years later, 20 years later since the epiphany. Whoa, I'm an old lady.
So we know, Laurel, it's very challenging to get a book published in Canada. There are a lot of writers, there are only so many presses, and you chose eventually to go a more non traditional route. Why did you make this choice, and what were the experiences that you had along this road, the challenges and the benefits?
Well, to be honest, I'll be glib, but I couldn't stand the rejections. And there weren't that many, but everyone broke my heart. Everyone crushed me. Everyone sent me, running with my head under the covers. And it's only partially true in that being rejected is par for the course. I think I could have hung in a little longer. Actually, I think the proof is in the pudding with the success the book has had since publication, that it probably would have eventually found a publisher. It probably might have done well, but I thought, and this was a miscalculation on my part, I thought that the only people interested in reading the book were going to be sort of the subjects of the book, the people of that generation, the people that went to war, the people that built their dreamland life in the aftermath of the war, the people who I had been spending so much time with. I thought that they would be the ones who wanted the story, and they were starting to die off, sadly, and they were starting to depart. And I thought, even if I got a book deal that day, it would be at least 2 years before the book was on a shelf in a store, and how many more would have to die before that happened. And I wasn't prepared to go that route and take that chance. And so I decided to independently publish, and I'm so glad I did.
Finally, Laurel, I'm interested in the reception of Awake for the Dreamland. So you published independently and then it went out into the world. And what were the sales figures like? To be superficial and to be deep, though it is important, and to be deep, what was the response from the readers?
Sales figures. Oh, it just sounds so much like we should be in an office tower when we say that. Okay, I independently published. It cost me something. I was a little nervous that only my mom and 3 relatives would buy the book, so I printed a small run, 250 books. Had my little run at Audrey's, or my launch rather, and I had to reorder the next week. And then I was reordering, and I was finding all of these cool places to sell books because I wasn't attached to a publisher. I could do my own thing. I had the autonomy, so I could sell a book from the trunk of my car at the Fast Gas in Lacombe. I could go to a person's book club, or what we called salons. People hadn't even bought the book yet, but somebody said, "Hey, come to my party. I want you to hear this author." And so it just kept building momentum, and nobody could have been more surprised and grateful than me, always a bit astonished. I think when it really began to accelerate, right when it could have died off, was when somebody had submitted the book to the Edmonton Public Library's Reader's Choice Award competition. So that was generating sales, and then in the end I won amidst all of these incredible authors. And talk about imposter syndrome, but it the numbers just kept selling, and that's really great. And don't get me wrong, I am really happy about that. And then went on to win the Whistler Independent Book Award, which is supporting independent authors that took the big plunge like I did. What matters the most, and this will maybe choke me up, is some of the most intimate, unexpected rewards of this whole journey. One of them happened actually even before the book was published, and that was being on a tour bus in Italy with veterans who had walked those paths, having our host, a historian, Ted Barris, holding the microphone to my lips as I read from a mediocre draft what I imagined these fellows had gone through. And the bus is silent, and the veterans say afterwards, after applauding of all things, but hey, kid, you got it right. So if I never sold a book, that moment was astonishing. And then happened that I did sell a book or two or 100 or whatever, doesn't matter, going to book clubs where the book began to feel less like mine and more like ours. So those book clubs, I think there was something like 60 of them, were always so intimate. But the night that a woman said towards the end, I just have to say, she said, I had a very difficult and complicated relationship with my recently departed father, and your book has given me a glimpse of what he must have gone through. And I can begin to understand and forgive him. So, sail schmail, like, who cares? It is these personal connections.
What words of deep wisdom, important knowledge based on your own path to publishing would you give to women?
Don't let anybody tell you that you're crazy. If I have a single kernel of wisdom, it's to say, grab hold of that glimmer of an idea and dare to disturb the universe with your voice, with your song, with your words, with your paintbrush, with all that is in your heart and soul, and enjoy every step of the journey. Even when it's breaking your heart, it is making your life worthwhile. The old friends are watching as the Dreamland is being demolished and the ice is starting to melt on the river. A young journalist comes and introduces herself and observes. The city seems to be knocking down the old buildings, creating controversy. I'd like to know what you think of that. Robert looked at her. This, he gestured the back of the theater wall, is just a building. He nodded towards William. But we have seen the most beautiful buildings, hundreds of years old, reduced to dust and rubble. All in a day's work in the war, William said sadly. Things change. Look around. Nobody dumps their garbage down here anymore. That's a good thing. But the nice little Chinese gardens are gone. That's too bad. But if you look closely, Robert interrupted, you'll see the river winds its way along, same as ever. The same, only different, Annie said. You can't see it for the ice, but underneath it's moving. I don't know how much chopping up of this valley the city's going to do, all for the sake of, what is it, progress? But everything's changing, even us. Sometimes I catch our reflection in a shop window now and think, ye gods, who are these old farts? The journalist spoke again. So you think the demolition of the Dreamland doesn't matter? Oh, it matters. Sydney'd been listening intently. But it's not what matters the most, he said. Sooner or later we'll pass on, Annie added, and our kids and their kids will deal with all our mistakes and their own as best they can, same as we did, and our parents. Life goes on. That's what matters.
They didn't notice the photographer slip away, but the next day their picture appeared on the front of the city section of the journal. They were walking arm in arm and three abreast towards the Mac. They were midway down the avenue. You could see the marquee of the Dreamland in the background.